What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks for Sports Illustrated on Fan Nation. And I am finally back in Eugene after some time away for the holidays and spent some time in Los Angeles as well. So back at my usual spot. If you've watched some of the recent videos, my background might have looked a little bit different, but we're back in Eugene now. Before we get into today's episode of the podcast, friendly reminder to make sure that you're locked into all the social media channels. That's Twitter at mtorresports and on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. And then you can find our other social media platforms with Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all at Ducks Digest. So kindly ask that you subscribe, follow, and like all those pages for us. It's a tremendous help. But with all that being said, let's get into some news from the weekend and kind of getting into this week since the last episode of the podcast. Starting things off, Ducks secured a 2022 commitment from offensive tackle Kawika Rogers. Rogers is a 6'6", 327-pound offensive lineman out of Kapa'a High School in Hawaii. He's rated the number 3 player, ranked, I should say, the number 3 player in Hawaii, according to 247 Sports, in the 2020-2022 class. He committed to Oregon over some competing offers from Arizona State, Fresno State, and Hawaii. So not a guy that had a ton of offers on the recruiting trail, but I think this is a really important commitment for Oregon, seeing that they saw their offensive line class almost evaporate practically following the departure of Mario Cristobal to Miami. And you obviously saw some shock waves from that. But at the offensive line position in particular, you saw Cristobal leave. And then to the surprise of nobody, Alex Mirabal followed him as well. So he was one of the strongest recruiters on Oregon's entire staff. And that was a big reason why the Ducks were able to have so many top-tier offensive linemen coming into the program. The Ducks did sign Michael Wooten during early signing period. He's an offensive lineman in the 2022 class out of Sierra Canyon High School in Southern California. So they were able to get him on board, which is great. And then with Rogers, I think it's really important that you not only get another guy along the offensive line, because we know how important it is to win in the trenches and keep adding guys at that position, but getting back into the state of Hawaii, I think that's really crucial. The Ducks have had some big-time players out of there in years past, so it's important to get that pipeline going again, and Rogers certainly helps accomplish that. I think that when you look at some of the past classes that Oregon's has had, Hawaii hasn't had a huge presence, so it's kind of weird with Hawaii. It's like a West Coast state, but it's not obviously on the West Coast. So sometimes people kind of lump that in there. But I think this is a big commitment for Oregon since the first offensive lineman that they get since Dan Lanning took over, obviously, and then under new offensive line coach Adrian Clem, who comes to Eugene from Pittsburgh Steelers. So getting a little bit of momentum there along the offensive line is great. And then you need all the momentum that you can possibly get heading into this next signing period in February. So that's the headline that we want to start things off with today in this episode of the podcast. And then we have some more updates that we want to get into here. The Ducks hosted a lot of visitors over this past weekend with the dead period coming to an end. Kind of an interesting balancing act for the staff here, right? You know, you had some coaches that were on the road recruiting. We've talked about some of them already. You know, right at that, they wanted to be literally showing up at recruits' homes right at that midnight. Clock strikes midnight, and then the dead period ended. A couple of those guys that come to mind: former commit Jaleel Florence out of San Diego, a corner that I think the Ducks are in a great spot with here. They've really shown that he's a priority for them. Florence posted a video on his Twitter that showed him and the staff in his home as late as around 2:30 in the morning. I think it was 2:26 that video was timestamped. So clearly some really heavy recruiting going on there with Oregon. And then Florence posted another photo later on recently. It was a picture of him and Grayson Halton, who's still committed to Oregon, the defensive line. It was them and then some of the Oregon coaches at a bowling alley So Oregon getting a lot of FaceTime in with Florence. And I think that's really important because for those that don't follow it, Florence was originally looking at maybe taking some more visits as he thinks about this decision for him, his recruitment. You have Miami, Oregon, USC, some big schools involved. Oklahoma as well kind of came on late. But since he said that he wasn't going to be taking visits, it was really big for the staff to get on the road and see him. If you're not going to come to us, we're going to come to you kind of a deal. So that was really big for Oregon. But the guy that I did get to talk to recently that was on campus is a big name out of the Pacific Northwest, 5-star defensive end, Jayden Wayne out of Lincoln High School in Tacoma, Washington. He was on campus this past weekend for a visit. Kind of weird circumstances, but they were still able to get him on campus. The circumstances being that he was supposed to go out to North Carolina to take a visit with the Tar Heels, but the flights got canceled. So what did he do? He took the short trip south to Eugene to check out the new staff under Dan Lanning, and the return on their return. The impressions from that visit are pretty positive. I have a full story up on Ducks Digest that you can definitely go read. I would invite you to check that one out. Tons of awesome quotations from Wayne just talking about that trip and kind of what really stood out to him. But the biggest thing is the coaching staff, right? And how would that not, be something that stands out to you, seeing that it's a totally new coaching staff under Dan Lanning. And the biggest coach that really seemed to stand out was Tosh Lupoi, the new defensive coordinator for Oregon. And I think that this is great to hear because, he's someone that has been touted as an elite recruiter. And we're already seeing some great return on the recruiting trail as far as recruits having a lot of good things to say about him. And specifically, Wayne said that Lupoi really breaks down the game easily for him. He sees that NFL potential, and he's confident that Lupoi sees the NFL potential in Wayne. Not too hard, obviously, with a guy of his caliber, 5-star status across multiple recruiting services, but he says that he sees NFL potential in him, and Wayne says that he's confident that he can come to Oregon and get developed to, reach his highest level as an athlete, which is huge. Then another part that was really interesting, with all these schools involved, I asked him, why is Oregon a serious contender for you? And I think the answer might kind of surprise some people. He was saying that he can represent a big brand like Nike, and he can be around teammates and coaches that want to win a natty. I feel really good about the coaches was the full quotation there. But we're seeing that national brand, the Nike brand, once again coming into Oregon's favor. That shouldn't surprise anybody, but I thought that was really interesting when you're looking at a guy of Wayne's caliber who has more than 35 offers, 37 when I last checked, and that's what's really pushing Oregon ahead. And with him being a top tier player in the Pacific Northwest, the Ducks definitely have to make sure that they're going to get those guys that are close to home, that are worth taking a shot at, that are really high level players. Some of the other schools that are involved here is kind of what I wanted to get into. Schools that he's hearing from the most include Alabama, Miami, USC, Oregon, Auburn, and Texas. Great to hear the Ducks are involved there with that answer. He did say in the interview that he wanted to make a return trip out to Oregon. Didn't get into specific details as far as timing and dates go, but that's always great to see that the staff made a great impression that he wants to be back here. Obviously, Wayne's no stranger to Oregon. He's visited the school numerous times throughout his recruitment, and it looks like the Ducks are continuing to prioritize him throughout his recruitment. As far as what's next for him on the trip, topic of trips, that got a little tripped up. Oh my God, I can't talk sometimes. But thanks for hanging in there with me. Some of the trips on the docket for Wayne coming up, going to be at Miami and USC this next weekend. And then he's going to round out the month of January by checking out Washington. Obviously, that's a big school to keep an eye on, seeing that he is really close to the Seattle area, and they got a new staff under Kalen DeBoer. And then moving along in his decision process and kind of his recruiting timeline, he does plan to drop a top 10 soon. He told me that he wants to graduate early, so if he can, he wants to take some official visits in April. So clearly it's a guy that wants to move his recruiting process along, but he's got tons of schools to really, sit down with and research and get to know those staffs. And that's a lot to handle for anybody. So he's got a lot to work on there, but that's kind of an update on kind of where he stands out. And then when I finished up this interview, I was asking him about what his family thought about the trip because they were on the trip with him, and he was saying that they loved it and that they have a really strong relationship with Dan Lanning, and a lot of the same things that stood out to Jayden stood out to his family as well. And I think another really cool tidbit on this visit that I kind of just wanted to talk about, his video. So he posted a video on the trip, and that was the first one that I saw from this kind of batch of visits this past weekend. A picture of his photo shoot, a picture of him at Autzen in the uniform. He chose the blackout uniforms the Ducks wore against Cal last year. Super clean combo, and definitely one of my personal favorites from the 2021 season. But I just think that these videos that schools make for these recruits on their visits is huge, because they post that. It can help them with their social media following, which obviously all these guys are trying to build. They're trying to build that brand. Goes back to Nike and all the NIL opportunities that Wayne and any other player could have here at Oregon. I think you're seeing some of these other schools across the country. Oklahoma does it. Alabama does it. Miami's starting to do it now. Alabama has the 360 videos, which I think would be a huge addition. The Ducks did something like that, but you also kind of want to make it unique. So I just think that's one of the coolest changes that we've seen under Dan Lanning since he took over at Oregon, and I think that's definitely a big positive to see. And then rounding out just my notes here on Wade, I asked him, what's the school going to have to do to ultimately secure your commitment, and he said they're going to have to be loyal and consistent, treat me and my family like family. And, Oregon's definitely checking those boxes, it sounds like. Still fairly early in his process, but I think that they're definitely emerging as one of the favorites after talking to him multiple times here throughout the recruiting process. Excuse me. Get a little bit of water here. And then now we shift to our next little section of the podcast here on the Ducks Dish podcast. Some transfer portal news. The Ducks have seen a lot of guys entering the portal lately. And, we were kind of waiting to see if Lanning would be able to, and the staff would be able to, convince them to come back to Oregon. And that hasn't been the case with everybody. Some people have decided that it's best for them to move on from the program. In the last episode of the podcast, we talked about Travis Dye entering his name into the portal. And we're still waiting for a decision there, but he's one of the biggest names for the Ducks to watch in the transfer portal. But Trey Benson, freshman running back for Oregon, did announce his commitment to Florida State on Tuesday. He becomes the second Duck to go to Tallahassee to play his college football. You'll remember that Micah Pittman, former Oregon wide receiver, announced his commitment and is now out in Tallahassee in ACC country. So 2 Ducks out to Florida State, and it's just kind of interesting when you see that going on. And then you think about how the Ducks got Kenny Dillingham as their new offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, who came across the country from Tallahassee. So some players kind of going back and forth, coaches going back and forth. For Benson, I think this is a good fit for him, because I think Mike Norvell and Florida State have had some encouraging moments in the last season. And I think that, with Benson has a lot to offer. We just ultimately didn't get to see very much play for him at Oregon. He was a guy that was really highly touted on the recruiting trail. Coming out of the state of Mississippi, had a lot of big time offers, really big back with a solid frame, 6 foot plus and north of 200 pounds with some really good speed, but he battled injuries while he was here at Oregon. And then obviously with Travis Dye and CJ Verdell holding down those top 2 spots, the carries just kind of got hard to come by. So a little bit of backstory there with Benson. And then a couple other guys, a couple other Oregon former Ducks announced their commitments to Auburn. That's quarterback Robbie Ashford and cornerback DJ James. Auburn has been a trendy destination for these former Ducks. Ashford and James both from the state of Alabama, and you also look at Jason Jones, who was the first Duck to announce his commitment to Auburn since entering the transfer portal. I think that Ashford's in a great spot to be competitive there in Auburn. After the Ducks, you'll see that they added Bo Nix in the transfer portal, so that kind of opens the door, the window of opportunity, if you will, for Ashford to come in and compete for a spot there, much closer to home with the Tigers. So Brian Harsin gets a very capable quarterback that we really just, quite frankly, didn't get to see at Oregon. So I think he's a great player that is going to provide some solid depth for Auburn, and I'd really like to see him, get some time. We saw some great play from him in the spring game and in the fall scrimmages that we saw, but like I said, kind of same deal with Benson. We just really didn't get to see too much of a sample size of actual in-game action. So he heads to the SEC, as does DJ James, who was really one of the steady contributors for Oregon in the defensive backfield last year. Now the Ducks have a pretty big need at corner with Mikael Wright going on to the NFL, and then DJ James officially off to Auburn. They did add Christian Gonzalez from Colorado to kind of offset that depth concern, but I still think they would need another cornerback just because you want to add some depth. You got Trequez Bridges and Dante Manning as some guys that got a lot of playing time last year and are still kind of getting their legs under them with Bridges coming down from safety and Manning getting his first really good chunk of playing time after coming to Oregon with the 2022 recruiting cycle. So more movement for the Ducks in the transfer portal. Wouldn't be surprised if they added somebody else from the transfer portal, as that's obviously been kind of an area that Dan Lanning has really utilized here, and which makes a lot of sense, right? When you look at the tight timeline that he kind of has to work with after coming to Oregon in December, being named the head coach, but still having to coach with Georgia. You go to the transfer portal and you get a lot of proven starters, proven Power 5 level guys for the most part that are capable of helping your program instantly, provided that it is their first transfer, right? With that rule, they don't have to sit out as long as this is their first transfer. And then, the Ducks are also looking to pick up some steam on the recruiting trail as well, like we talked about with Rogers, as we close in on February and the next signing period for the prep guys and the JUCO guys as well. Just to wrap up this episode of the podcast with a little bit of hoops news, the Ducks, both men's and women's team, had some big wins of late. You'll think back to last week with the men securing big wins over USC and UCLA, two top 5 programs in the country. Both of those wins coming on the road in Los Angeles, which is huge. Dana Altman really seems like he had the Ducks turning the corner here after just an abysmal start to the season. Will Richardson and Jacob Young were playing some tremendous basketball. Frank Kepnong was blocking everything in sight, it felt like, in that USC game. And then you look at the women, who had some really great basketball as well, securing wins over Arizona and UConn at home in Eugene. That's 2 top 10 wins, I believe they were, in the span of 24 to 48 hours. So huge wins for both Duck programs, for Dana Altman and Kelly Graves. But we get some news Tuesday out of Eugene that the upcoming game against Washington State for the men, which was scheduled for Thursday, January 20th at Matt Knight Arena, has been postponed because of COVID-19 protocols within the Cougars program. Kind of as these press releases go, they said every effort will be made to reschedule this game. So just really bad timing for particularly for the Ducks, seeing, like I said, that they really seemed like they were hitting their stride, getting some huge wins on the hardwood. And, you hate to see these postponements for any team, right? These COVID protocols are still popping up, and it's just tough to see. But, that's kind of some of the hoops news that we have. But that will do it for this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. If you are watching on Apple Podcasts, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, kindly ask that you follow, subscribe, and give us positive rates and reviews. That's a tremendous help. And then if you are watching on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, kindly ask that you subscribe to the channel. Just passed 1,000 subs, and it's been great seeing the feedback and the support from everybody, from all the Duck fans. Go ahead and do me a favor as well and share the episode with other Duck fans, just trying to grow it and reach as many people as possible. Recruiting season is in full effect, so make sure that you stay tuned into ducksdigest.com, where we'll get some updates, and check us out on Ducks Digest forums so you can engage with other Duck fans as we work to build the community here at Ducks Digest. But that'll do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you in the next one.